Hey, how's it going again? So, after we ran through all that material on poetry and drama and prose, now it's time to think about writing the essay. Some colleges, some, may require that you do this section. You should check with the schools that interest you to see if this is the case. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it and help you try to organize yourself with the time that you have to write them. So there's two 45-minute essays. In one, you analyze a short poem. In the other, you apply a generalization about literature to a short story, play, or novel that you have read. For the first essay, analysis of a poem, you should definitely keep your eye on the time. Super important. Always keep your eye on the time. You don't want to be caught up and just be half done. Make a rough outline. I'll help you with that in a couple of minutes. Organize your ideas into paragraphs. Think of one idea with different details. Each detail can be presented in a paragraph. Use some literary terms you remember. Some of the ones that we went over in the poetry section, for example. Use examples and cite them. So giving examples is always important. You don't want to just give a summary of what was said. You want to give particular examples to show that you understand what's going on. For the second essay, analysis of something you've already read. In addition to the suggestions in the previous slide in terms of timing and organization, you should also think about selecting a text you remember. It might take a minute to think of one. You could take one from a class you took. Maybe you remember one from something you read when you were younger, or recently even. But you should take a second and brainstorm to think. Just go through in your brain and try to figure out, what are some possible things I could write about. You want to give a general analysis within the guidelines. Please make sure that you follow the guidelines that are given to you. It might be a character development, something to do with symbols, etc. And don't, like I said, just give a summary of the text, because unless they ask for a part of that, because you always want to give examples and show that you're on line with what they ask. So please remember time. Now, time is super important. When you take the test, you have to keep your eye on the time. So, make sure that you try to organize yourself. Think about, what you need to do before you go in there. You've got brainstorming, outlining, and you've got thinking about what you're going to say, etc., and then writing it. So break those times up. Organization, super important. I never really understood the importance of organization until I started reading all these papers that I'm reading now for my classes. When I was a student, I would just, I'd write stuff. Yeah, they'll figure out what I'm saying. But organization is super important, because if you have something that's physically looks good in the paper, like you give the essay, and I see you've got the paragraphs broken up into 5 different parts, and I can see there's an introduction. I walk into that and I say to myself, wow, this is pretty organized. And if there's certain things that I need to look for, I can jump around and find them. Here we go. This gets off to a good start. I tell my students in my writing classes, if I can look at your paper and understand what it's about in a minute, you'll probably get an A on that, because when it's all jumbled up, I have to write 1 million comments, and I have to decipher and decode, and it's a lot more work for both of us. And if you just have that organization right off, it's really helps out across the board. So always use examples, what you're talking about. So here's an example of this, and explain the examples also. That's important. So for the rough outline, I'm just going to help you kind of put one together. It's a couple of slides here. In the intro, you might have a hook, an orientation, focus, and a thesis. So your hook, so you're kind of bringing people in this sort of kind of funnel like this. It's a hook to get attention getter. Your orientation, this is what you're talking about. This is your theme. This is your text. You've got a focus, kind of where you're going with this. And then you're going to have one sentence, which is going to be like your thesis statement. So that's going to be the backbone of what you're saying, and everything else should definitely stem off of that. So for the second paragraph, you have idea 1 on your thesis. You might have detail, example, detail. Maybe in the third paragraph, fourth paragraph, you're following the same thing. Maybe you switch it up and have detail with an example. You might do it a different way, just to give you a couple of different ideas. And in the conclusion, you're revamping the thesis, you're reviewing your objectives, and you're giving them an unhook. So on the conclusion, you've kind of got this funnel where so in the beginning you're bringing them down into this like this. You go down in your paragraphs, and then when you're done, you're taking them out. So you funnel them in, bring them through your paper, and funnel them out. So for the introduction of the essay, like I said, you want to funnel them in with a hook, orientation, focus, and thesis. What's a good hook? A hook would be something, just a general, it could be a statement. Maybe you're writing a poem about, maybe it's a lyrical poem that you have to analyze. So you might say, Aristotle said there was 3 types of poetry. Or it might say lyrical poetry is a tradition that. And then orientation, you're bringing people into the idea. A lot of lyrical poets, a lot of lyrical poetry was written in England, Focus. Some particular poets, one particular poet, Thesis. In my essay, I will explain whatever the focus is of what you're going to say, okay? So that will be your thesis, your last sentence there in the introduction. In the body of the essay, you want to stay on track. 3 or 4 paragraphs, each one with one detail that's explained. You want to stay in the idea of progressively proving your thesis. So you don't want to, my thesis is about this, so I'm going to show this. So all of a sudden you say, hey, wait, I got another idea. No, you can't do that. You have to make that part of your thesis. You can maybe add it to the end of your thesis. So I'm going to show this, this, and this. But, you don't want to have something that's not really part of the backbone. I always go by this imagery of this, like the thesis statement is kind of like the backbone, and then you've got, the ribs coming out like this, and that's kind of, your topic sentences of your main idea or your main details coming out of the thesis, because they all grow. And that spinal cord supports all of the ribs, all of the ideas you have. So each paragraph should start with a topic sentence, and this is kind of like one sentence that shows what you're going to say in that paragraph. And when you give examples, you should use kind of a sandwich. So you kind of introduce an idea, give your example, and then explain it. In this poem, we have an example of a simile. And then you give the simile. And you say here, by using a comparison with like, we can see that the poet is explaining that his lover is ... So you want to explain your examples and not just throw them in there. And then your conclusion, like I said before, you want to funnel out the readers. You don't want to say the same thesis, but you kind of, this is my idea, this is what I said, and then you unhook them on that sense. So I hope that, if you write your essays, you can take a lot of the ideas that I brought forth in the other 3 sections. I hope that, you always consider organization, and I hope that, all of these segments of videos will bring you a very successful CLEP exam when you take this particular course.